We welcome in Congressman Steve King, Republican from the great state of Iowa. Hello, sir.
Well, hello, and thanks very much. It's good to be back talking with you again. It's been too long.
It has, Steve, and I thank you very much. Before we get to this very troubling story and actually the facts about the Pigford case and the results from the Pigford case, where Hispanic farmers and other minority farmers got money that they really had no business getting, let me ask you, since there's nobody more active on the immigration issue than you, and the president, of course, is in Mexico, and he's going to push, you know, he's going to give his immigration presidential stump speech down in Mexico. To me, that is so inappropriate. It just reeks of inappropriateness. What can we anticipate in his campaign to, again, push for comprehensive immigration reform down in Mexico?
Oh, my. You know, if you read the bill, the 844-page bill, I think what the president will be doing is already written into the bill. And we know that it grants instantaneous amnesty to everybody that's in the United States illegally, and with some exceptions that perhaps will materialize through due to law enforcement over time. But it also, in the bill, it says it invites everybody who has been deported in the past to reapply to come back to the United States. It says we didn't mean it. And so here's the president down in Mexico. He's the one that's essentially carrying the greeting card. Presumably there were people in Mexico that have been deported. He's down there in his presence saying, we're going to legalize everybody that's in America, and if you've been deported, come back and try again. We may be able to let you into the United States. I think you'll hear that from him. This is just, it's completely outrageous to think that a president would undermine a national sovereignty and the rule of law that way and not have the utter outrage of all of Congress lined up against him. And it doesn't even have the utter outrage of all Republicans lined up against him, because some of them are complicit.
Absolutely, and that's what my next question to you before we move on to the topic at hand was going to be. I don't know what's going to happen in the Senate, because I don't, there are so many, in my view, rhino Republicans in the Senate. But what about the House, and what about Boehner? And I mean, can we count on the Republicans in the House to make sure that that something along the lines of the bill that's already been introduced into the Senate doesn't become law?
Well, I think that Marco Rubio has, I know he's already said that the version of the bill that's in the Senate won't pass the House. That, of course, is not a definitive ruling, but it's an opinion that I agree with. As I see this thing unfold in the House, you know that the Speaker has given an implied endorsement to the decisions or to the work of a secret committee in the House that has been supposedly working for 4 years to put together some kind of reform language. Funny that I've not been invited to any of those meetings, and I'm one of those folks that are on that issue constantly. But I don't know where John Boehner stands, except for him to imply that we need to pass some kind of comprehensive immigration reform in order to, regain the political opportunity. But I'm also troubled that we don't have a very big or strong oppositional effort in the House. About 3 weeks ago, I pulled together some people, and they've been great. But there just aren't enough of us yet, although I'm hearing members come up and kind of whisper in my ear, I agree with you, I don't want to step out front, but I'm going to be supportive where I can. Right now, the odds are against the rule of law. We're going to have to mobilize a big effort, and it's not going to come out of the leadership. It's probably not going to come out of the committee chairs. But I do think a lot of Bob Goodlatte, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he wants to bring the individual components of immigration reform along. I fear that if the House passes one bill like that it gets sent over to the Senate, then they could set up a conference committee, take a Senate amnesty bill, and bring it before a conference committee, and the House could end up with the Senate amnesty bill in front of it, unamendable in an up or down vote, and then every Democrat votes for it, a handful of Republicans do. That's how you get amnesty on the president's desk.
I don't know what the Republicans are thinking, but I got one more for you. John McCain said this about, I don't know, I would have thought that the Boston attacks, and given the fact that we have 3 more arrests of 2 of them are students who violated their visa, I would have thought that there would be more. That would have more influence on the debate, and I don't know that it is having what I thought it would have, the effect it would have. Listen to what John McCain said, though, about one of these arrested students yesterday who left the country. He was in violation of his visa, and yet he came back into the country. Here's what John McCain had to say.
It's terribly disappointing that any person, knowing the catastrophe and the mayhem and the act of terror that was committed, by these two brothers who would attempt to cover it up. And all of us should be outraged. Maybe as part of immigration, overall immigration reform, we should look at the process of who's allowed into this country, particularly from countries that have histories where there's been significant influence of radical Islamic extremism.
I know you would probably agree with that, wouldn't you?
That seems to be a kinder and gentler way of saying what I said the day of the Boston bombing, which is step back, look at the way that all of these people get into this country, and I specifically mentioned student visas as one of the open door policies into the United States, and that overstays are not monitored or followed up on. So this is a time I agree with what John McCain said, only I would be a little more emphatic in the way I would address it. And some other things that not only do we have most of the 9/11 hijackers came in on tourist visas. Tourist visas are essentially an open door, and so are student visas. There's asylum, that's another method, and we've seen that asylum methodology be part of the case with the two bombers for Boston. And then we should also be thinking about that we always call them persons of interest from nations of interest, which are people that fit the profile of a terrorist that come from a terrorist-producing nation, to put it bluntly. There are also a respectable number of them, one that should cause us to be very concerned, coming across our southern border. Some go into the Central South American countries and stay there a couple years and learn some Spanish and change their name to an Hispanic last name, then sneak into America. I find out about them occasionally, but they go into the FBI then. They go to FBI's custody. At that moment, even the Border Patrol can't tell me about them any longer because it's classified. We don't know what that number is. I know of 7 of those cases, but I had to learn about them same day because they become classified sometime later in the day. I'm very concerned about that open door, too, Steve.
All right. We're talking to Congressman Stephen King here, who is a member of the Agriculture, Small Business, and Judiciary Committees. And let's talk about this story. I mean, when the Obama administration came in, the Obama appointees have spent over $1.3 billion to compensate Hispanic and female farmers that, according to a Supreme Court decision in 2010, they didn't have to compensate, but they did it anyway. And you've been looking at these cases, including 60 FBI criminal investigations, and Andrew Breitbart broke the story, and you were right there with him, the late Andrew Breitbart, talking about the Pigford case and how the black farmers who received compensation for alleged discrimination, so many of them weren't farmers at all, never were discriminated against, didn't grow anything, and that opened the door for these latest payouts to the Hispanic farmers. What are you planning on doing here?
Well, I have to pull some of the people together in Washington to track the best method. I spent about an hour on the phone today trying to arrange this thing in the best way that we can. I want to thank the New York Times. This is a time when the front page of the New York Times got something very important right that actually ran counter to their general political ideology, and so I don't see that very often. This Pigford issue, I've been, I will say, in the middle of this since about 2003, when a former USDA official presented me a cardboard box full of applications that were used to hand $50,000 out to each of those applicants. And he said that he believed that more than 75% of those applications were fraudulent in that they never farmed and didn't, and you go on down the list, never farmed is enough. So here we are today with as much as $4.4 billion in taxpayer payouts, and Congress needs to act. I don't know how we stop this otherwise. Tom Vilsack, the Secretary of Agriculture, and Eric Holder, the Attorney General, as we know, have been working together to set this up to hand the payouts out to Hispanic, Native American, and women farmers or alleged farmers, and they're operating out of the slush fund, which you'll know is the judgment fund. And if Congress doesn't step in, they have got this huge slush fund that they can just deal out for whatever political whim they have without correct congressional oversight. So I want to talk to the chairs of the Ag and Judiciary Committee and see how we organize this. But if I had the answer on what I would do today, I would bring a resolution to the floor of the Congress that blocks any funding from this point forward, freezes it in place until such time as we can do a full investigation. And then I would require that, at a minimum, if you think you've been discriminated against by the USDA, and I believe some were, that should be compensated, show me your farm number, so that would show that how you're registered as a farmer, If you weren't registered with the USDA, then you didn't have a claim.
Yeah,
And it's that simple.
you would think that's the you would think that to get compensation, that would be the minimum requirement to show that you were a registered farmer, not just claim that you were growing stuff. And I've heard and read all kinds of stories over the years about people admitting, the people who got compensation admitting that they weren't farmers after all.
Oh, and many of them. And here's and I said a more than 75% number from the USDA employee that handed me those copies of applications. But here's another one. I sat down with, I will say, one of the administrators with a significant position on this, and had that conversation way into the night about the different cases that had been dealt with by the USDA and the money that had spent. And at a certain place in that conversation, I'm listening to the narrative, and I wanted to put it in proportion, and I said, but do you believe that there were black farmers that were discriminated against? And then tears welled up in this USDA worker's eyes, and it was just so emotional. And the answer I got was yes. And as the tears welled up and began to start down the cheek, I said, how many? And more tears, 50. And we're talking 94,000 applications.
And he said 50?
50, and I said 50,000? No. 50.
Wow, it is one of the greatest. It appears to be one of the greatest hoaxes that the taxpayers have had to foot the bill for in a long time. And Congressman King, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for staying on top of this, and let us know how it's. We'll follow you along as this progresses. We'll have you back.
Well, I look forward to that. Thanks for having me on today. It helps me vent myself, and it gives me better direction on what we need to do in the future. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Congressman Stephen King of Iowa, ladies and gentlemen.